Everyone, this is Danielle. As promised, I'm providing a screencast video lecture on revising the classical argument paper. I'm going to start by going over some cumulative tips on revising this assignment, and it's cumulative because the following tips are things that I have given to a large majority, or I gave to a large majority of student papers, and they're also very common cumulative tips, so they're things that is not just specific to this particular course, but is they're things that are they come up again and again. So firstly, you want to ensure that you're crafting an argumentative and not an expository paper, and this is really important because the name of the assignment is the classical argument draft, so you want to make sure that you are in fact creating an argumentative paper and not expository. Expository writing, if you think of expository and exposition, it means to be informational. You're providing information. So while you do provide information in an argumentative paper, you want to make sure that it's not rhetorically written as an expository paper. And so you want to ask yourself, how would someone debate your particular topic or thesis? And what are some of the opposing views, or it could be more opposing views, viewer views to your thesis or argument. So those are just two ways to kind of get you to ask questions to yourself about how to ensure you are in fact creating an argumentative paper. And I have other notes that are similar to that and make this a little bit bigger. You also want to ensure you have a fully developed introduction. The introduction is a really rhetorically important part of any research paper. And you want to make sure that it fully prepares the reader for what you are addressing in your paper. In terms of the length of introductions, when you have a paper about this length, what happens is the longer the paper, the longer the introduction. So if you have a 20-page paper, your introduction might be, 3 to 5 pages. When you have a shorter paper, like ours, the introduction should probably be about at least half a page. And in some cases, it might be 3/4 of a page. You probably don't want a full page introduction for this particular paper because it's not long enough. But there's a lot of stuff you need to do in the introduction. Again, to fully prepare the reader for what you are going to be doing in the paper. And some of the other notes I have kind of circle back to that idea, including the ensuring you have an argumentative thesis. So you don't want your thesis, again, to be expository. You don't want it to be what we would call a common knowledge statement. So if you have that, that's going to set you up, unfortunately, for an expository or informational paper. And I just gave an example of one that I've seen, not just in this class, but and I don't even think I saw this one in this class, but I've seen it in all of my years of teaching. I've seen it a lot. Climate change is a problem that needs immediate action, right? That's a statement. It's very vague. It's potentially argumentative, but on a very large level. So that would need tons of narrowing down in different ways. So you really want to think about your thesis in terms of how specific is it, and then ensuring that it is an argumentative thesis, right? So for this one, I would probably tell this student, okay, what particular aspect of climate change, if you're addressing the kind of climate change deniers, that topic, that would be different than, say, if a student was addressing something specific about climate change that needed government action, or the government needed to modify or add regulations as a means to modify something in particular. And it could be as tiny as, single-use plastic, or carbon emissions, or microplastics, right? Or there's so many parts of what constitutes the concept of climate change, that just talking about that and then saying that it's a problem that needs fixing doesn't do the work that a thesis needs to do. You want to make sure also that your thesis is not what we call a disconnected thesis. This is actually quite common in student introductions. A disconnected thesis is where you have, if you think about your thesis as being the final sentence in your introduction, and then you have all the other information that comes before your thesis. A disconnected thesis means that all of the information that comes before that last sentence, none of it has information that leads into that thesis. The thesis becomes this kind of, oh, guess what this paper is about, right? So it can take your reader by surprise. So and that means when you have a disconnected thesis, when the information leading up to the thesis is not then reiterated in your thesis, because that is really what a thesis is. The thesis is kind of taking the information you provide in your introduction, condensing it and specifying it and reiterating it, meaning you're restating some information that you've already mentioned in your introduction, but putting it into all one sentence so that the reader is very clearly, hopefully, on the same page as you in terms of what this paper is for. And one of the ways to avoid that disconnected thesis is to make sure you're properly forecasting. So the forecasting is where if you think about forecasting, I think we generally, at least I tend to think about the weather. So, right, the weather person might say, right, today is going to be, in the morning it's going to be this, in the afternoon it's going to be this, the sunset is going to be at this time, and then there's going to be like this in the evening. And then you kind of live out that day, and hopefully the forecast is correct, right? So that's essentially what you're doing in your introduction, is you're saying, these are the different things that I'm going to be doing in my paper that are important to my thesis, right? So this is the argument, this is the position I'm taking on this particular topic or controversy. These are the things I'm going to talk about that make this a topic worth arguing for, particularly in the way that I'm arguing for it. So that's forecasting. And then you go into the body. So you want to make sure that each of your body paragraphs, including the body paragraph where you address your opposition, they work to develop and support your thesis. So each of your body paragraphs, there's, again, like the introduction, there's a lot of rhetorical work that needs to be done in the body paragraphs, but your body paragraphs need to contain a subclaim that supports your thesis. So if you've set yourself up in the introduction with an expository thesis, you're going to suffer in the body paragraphs. Like, you're making yourself suffer, not me. Because you're not setting yourself up adequately to be able to make an argument about something, right? So when you make an argument about something, you say, well, I'm arguing this because of this reason and this reason and this reason. But if you're just providing information, then how do you turn that rhetorically into an argument in each of your paragraphs? So each paragraph needs to contain a subclaim that supports your thesis, which was part of the work that the outline activity asked you to do, was to think about the various subclaims. Each paragraph, and you've hopefully have heard of the concept of a topic sentence before, but each body paragraph needs a topic sentence at the beginning of that paragraph to let the reader know what to expect in the paragraph. A topic sentence is sometimes referred to as the mini thesis statement of each body paragraph, because it contains the overarching purpose and argument of that paragraph. You should be appropriately and briefly integrating evidence throughout your body paragraphs. And in respect to how you appropriately integrate evidence, that includes justifying to your readers why you're integrating the evidence. So that's the analysis part. And that's where you explain how the particular evidence is working for or serving not only the subclaim in the paragraph, but the overall paper's thesis. So your name is on the paper. So I'm expecting you to tell me things. Whenever you bring in another voice, right, so any evidence you bring in is someone else's voice, you have to do work to explain to me, your reader, why you're bringing in someone else's voice. It has to be meaningful and it has to make sense. And you do that by addressing it explicitly, making sure that it's not dominating the paper, right? So you don't want to move into what we call source dependency. So the source dependency is where you are depending too much on your sources to speak for you. Okay, and then you want to end your... I'm also not trying to... I don't want this to be... I always say I don't want these to be super long videos, and then they always are. But I'm going to be talking about this, and then I'm going to go over one of your classmates' papers. So you want to make sure you end your body paragraphs by circling back to the main purpose of the paragraph. This is what we call framing. So you don't just want to end your paragraph, your body paragraphs. You have to kind of remind the reader this was the argumentative purpose of this paragraph. And then I give some examples of questions to ask yourself, and not just about the end of the paragraph, but really about just each of your body paragraphs in general, right? What is because this is also what I ask as a reader, right? So what is the argumentative purpose of this paragraph? How is this paragraph working for my thesis? And why is this paragraph necessary for my overall paper? If I'm confused as your reader why you're giving me certain information, that means you haven't done the work you need to do as the writer. Moving on to talking about effectively integrating evidence, right? Because you want to make sure that you're not only integrating evidence, but you're effectively integrating it. This is actually a relatively difficult thing to do, but this is, it's not something I expect students to leave English 123 knowing exactly and perfectly how to do it, because there's lots of different ways to do it, and it's done really through practice and learning across, several years of writing. So in APA, you should be doing either direct quotation or paraphrasing. You don't want to be doing summary. It's the most difficult to do. Even paraphrasing, I would say, even though APA prefers paraphrasing, in a class like English 123, you should be starting off with direct quotation. But you can be doing direct quotation and or paraphrasing. Regardless of the above, meaning regardless if you're doing direct quotation and or paraphrasing, you need in-text citations. That was something that I found missing a lot throughout a lot of individuals' papers. And the in-text citations should often include the page number or the paragraph number. So I guarantee you that if you're quoting from a scholarly source, you have a page number, even if you're not including it in your in-text citation. You need to find that PDF version of the source. If it's an HTML version, you need the paragraph number. So you have to give one of those. And I give some examples here. So there's what we call narrative integration of a source. This is where you include the author or authors and the year in the signpost, which is that information, the contextual lead-in that you write leading up to the quotation or paraphrase. Right, so my example is Jones and Miller, that's the year, right? Argue that, whatever, and then ending that with the in-text citation, P dot space, and that's the page number. If you don't use the author or year info in the signpost, right, just something like research shows that, whatever, then you put all that information in the in-text citation, Jones and Miller, comma, year, comma, P dot space, and then the number of the page. Something I found that a lot of people were doing, so I just wanted to address it, is what I don't call it this. APA calls it integrating indirect sources. So this is when you're looking, especially when you're looking at scholarly sources, scholarly source writers are going to be addressing a lot of other sources, right? They're going to be saying like, these people said this and these people said that. So you might find yourself wanting to quote one of those, what we call secondary sources that your primary source is using. It's sometimes what we call a quote and a quote, but it's not technically. So I gave an example of this. So say that in this Jones and Miller source that they're citing somebody named Smith, and you want to use the information that Smith has provided. So, and I have this as a paraphrase and not a direct quotation, right? So like one survey evidenced that, whatever. And then what you do is you give that the last name of that secondary source, right? The source that Jones and Miller are referring to, and you say as cited in. So Smith as cited in Jones and Miller, year, P dot, space, page number. So that's how you work with indirect sources, and that's something that you can find in the APA manual. I also, just as a reminder, make sure if you use direct quotations that you don't have it formatted as an orphan or a hit and run quotation. And as a reminder, I uploaded on Canvas in the handouts and resources module a handout on orphan and hit and run quotations, and so you can look at that to see how to effectively integrate direct quotation. And it also goes over signposts, which are important when you are integrating not just direct quotations but also paraphrase. So moving on, you want to ensure you are clearly addressing and refuting the opposition. So this comes toward the end in your paper, but you want to make it its own paragraph so it's clear to the reader when you're doing it. If it's not clear to me, if I have to hunt for it, use the word opposition. Don't be afraid to be that direct, because that's what you want for your reader. You don't want your reader hunting things out. You want to be like, okay, now they're talking about the opposition, right? Or, opposing views to whatever. Okay, got it. I get it. I know what you're doing. And just as a reminder, the criteria in the assignment for how to refute the opposition includes that you need to support your refutation with appropriate and sufficient evidence. So you can't just talk about the opposition and then refute it. You have to refute it and then provide appropriate and sufficient evidence for your refutation. And that's one of the ways in which you build ethos as a writer. Just some quick APA notes. Make sure you are using correct APA formatting. You can use APA 6 or 7, as I've said before. Double check your in-text citations and your references page to make sure you are correctly formatting everything per APA 6 or 7. And your title, an APA prescription is about your title, and your title should reflect your thesis. So just like when we're doing research and we're looking at the names of articles that we might consider using in our own work, it's always great when we come across an article that has a title that really describes what that article is about. If you have to open it up and read the abstract and potentially skim the article to understand what the actual argument it is, again, those are a writer or writers not doing the work that they need to do in the crafting of their title, so that the reader understands immediately what it's about. And of course, as a reminder, you want to proofread. The best tactic that I would give to everybody all the time is to read it aloud. I read my work aloud. I sound crazy. I don't care. I read it to my husband. So if you can find somebody, if you can, in these days of quarantine, if you're quarantined with somebody, force them to listen to you. Be like, sit down, you're listening to me read this. But that's a really good way to catch some sentence level mechanic issues. When I see a lot of problems in terms of the way sentences are grammatically crafted, you want to read it aloud. And as a reminder, you can make an appointment with the Virtual Communication Lab. It's free. It's a resource for you for Embry-Riddle worldwide, and you can work one-on-one with wonderful tutors. I've been a tutor for the VCL. I may be again in the future, but they will work with you for 30 or 60 minutes, and you can work with them multiple times during the week. So I definitely encourage everybody to take advantage of that. And I have an announcement, so you can find it a little bit earlier in the term, that talks about how to schedule an appointment with the virtual communication lab. You can also just drop in, just make sure you know when their hours are. And then they'll let you know, like, oh, I'm not working with anybody, so I can work with you now. Or I'm working with somebody right now. Can you wait, this long? So those are the cumulative tips. I will also provide this. I'll attach this document to the announcement where I provide this video, so you'll have access to these cumulative tips. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the draft of one of your classmates, and it is David. I promised I would make it anonymous. And I feel terrible now because I forgot to remove this name. That's why I was pausing for a minute, because I was like, should I stop the video now and then make a new one where I redo this? So hopefully David won't mind. I try to be very gentle when I'm doing this type of feedback, because it can be awkward for students. So anyways, he was very, very generous in letting me use his draft. So he's obviously writing on the benefits of wind energy. So right away I can see that, just to start off with APA notes, David's choosing to use APA 6. So APA 6 does state that you have to use Times New Roman, size 12. APA 7, and if you watch my video on formatting your paper in APA 7, it does allow you more flexibility in terms of what font and font sizes you can use. But since David has chosen to use APA 6, I am going to modify. I'm going to do this for APA 6. And I can also see that he didn't choose different first page. So I'm also going to choose that. It's going to delete this header. Sorry, David. But I'm going to show you how to set up that. Now I don't know why it's not giving me this. I feel like my Word has updated. Here we go. Page number. Page number, right home. But first, I want to make sure that my font is for APA 6, Times New Roman, size 12. This is not required in APA 7, which is why I like the new. And I think it's the benefits of wind energy. Okay, and then we're going to space, space, space. Before I do that, let me double check the margins. Can I not do that while I'm doing this? I just want to make sure the margins are correct so I don't have to redo it. They are. They're 1 inch all around. All right, and pushing the space bar, and then backspace or delete until that page number jumps back up, and double click to get out of there. So now that's the correct header for APA 6. So now I want to modify this one, because only the cover page has the words running head in APA 6. So I'm just going to delete that and then reinsert page number. Make sure I'm going to have to redo the font because I selected different first page. So the cover page, because the cover page in APA 6 is slightly different, you do not have to do any of this in APA 7. It's much easier in APA 7. There we go. And then, so again, if you're doing APA 6, just the title, not running head, all caps, Times New Roman, size 12. And then that's a beautiful APA 6 header. I'm also going to go ahead and modify all of the font to be Times New Roman, size 12. And I also want to make sure the spacing is uniform. So it should be double, or sorry, 0, 0 in spacing in the paragraph dialog box. Double. I say OK. And I'm going to make sure this is I'm going to show my paragraph. I just want to bring this up just a little bit. I think that's good. And in APA 6, okay, I just want one page. There we go. You don't need this. Again, remember you want your title to be reflective of the thesis. So that is the cover page for APA 6. All right. Now in APA 7, you do bold the title, but we're not doing APA 7. We're doing APA 6. So that doesn't get bolded. You don't get credit for doing APA 6 and APA 7. If you're doing one, you want to stick with it. Okay, and you don't want those extra spaces. So I made sure the spacing was uniform, so we're going to have beautiful uniform spacing. When you are a writing style nerd like I am, these are the types of things I take pleasure in. It's like, yes, look at those beautiful uniform spacing from paragraph to paragraph. It's a very nerdy thing to like. Okay. Minor formatting. Not going to worry about formatting again because I checked the margins, headers, font, all of that fun stuff. Okay, so let's look at the introduction. And I know that videos like this can be tedious and boring, but that's the nature of revision. I actually like revision because that means that I've done most of the work. Sometimes I have to go back and do a lot more work, but for the most part, it's done. I'm going to turn on my track changes because I'm going to be giving this to David later as a extra benefit for him for offering his paper. Okay, I'll make this a little bit larger. Okay, so we know that he's talking about the benefits of wind energy. I would recommend a slightly more specific title, but it's okay. Because the benefits of wind energy makes it sound like it's going to be an expository paper. Like you're going to be talking about, here are the benefits of wind energy. They do this, they do that, they do this. Which I assume that he's going to be doing some of that in here. But it should be couched rhetorically in an argumentative way. So I have track changes on, so you're going to see me making edits as I go. And then I'll just kind of talk about things. I'm not going to do the entire paper. So, and because this is what I also do when I provide feedback in the speed grader, as I did for the classical argument drafts, is that, and this is a very normal thing, but when I've given feedback to like the introduction and like sometimes the first 2 body paragraphs, it's kind of like, all right, everything I've said, I can say. I'm just going to be repeating myself at some point. Sometimes I'll go to the opposition section and provide feedback there because it's a slightly different rhetorical paragraph. But I oftentimes will give feedback like for half or 3/4 of the paper. And that's because, and I've even said in some feedback, like I'm no longer giving feedback after this point. But do check your references page because sometimes I make notes on there. Like, I'm not giving feedback at this point because everything I've already said can be applied to the remainder of your paper. It's also not my job as, when I provide feedback as your reviewer to provide feedback on absolutely everything I can provide feedback on. I don't have that time in the world. So the best practice, 15 minutes per paper as an instructor. I don't do that. I usually spend much longer, between 30 and 45 minutes per paper. But instructors should spend no more than 15 minutes. And that's also because there's a fine line between giving too much information, too much feedback. I've gotten feedback before as a student where it was just like, well, I guess I should just drop out because I don't know what to do with all of this feedback. It's too much. I don't know where to start. Clearly, I'm terrible at this. So there's also a fine line where we don't want to give too much feedback. You want to give just enough so that it then becomes the student's job to take that feedback and engage in what we call reflective revision, where they are thinking critically and recursively to go through and apply that feedback. Right? So feedback isn't just about quote unquote fixing what an instructor tells you. It's about really reviewing your own work as someone of agency over your communication. Okay, so enough of that. I'm going to read. I'm not the greatest reader. Oil rig disasters in the Gulf, coal mine accidents, visible smog in Los Angeles. All these were byproducts of the United States' heavy dependence on fossil fuels. I'm going to do that. Whoops, I still have my caps lock on. Apostrophe S because that needs possession. Oil rig disasters in the Gulf, coal mine accidents. I would turn this into a full sentence. And visible smog in Los Angeles. Now my word's going to decide to go slow. There we go. Are all examples of the byproducts of the United States' heavy dependence on fossil fuels. This is not this is not only our nation's problem, but a global issue. So I think that this is what we call a vague pronoun. I think he's talking about fossil fuel dependency. So you could join those. I'll get rid of that one. Which is not only our nation's problem. Anytime you do not only, it's not only ... but also. In 2010, there was an explosion in the Gulf of Mexico on the oil rig. No comment needed. Deepwater Horizon. Excuse me. It was, and then one thing I always say is because we want brief quotations, if there's a the, just take the out of the quotation. It's not needed. It was the worst such accident in U.S. history, spilling millions of gallons of blah, blah, blah. That's a quotation with a citation that looks good, except I'm wondering if there's a P dot something or a para dot something. So I would ask that of him. In 2006, there was a methane explosion at the Sago mine in West Virginia, killing 12 miners. Okay. This confuses me. I get that there's a year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the reference page. This is not something unusual that I do. So I'm going to be looking for the history.com editors. So this is not cited correctly. This is the site name. The site name comes after. This is the title. So this is what we would want. And when you're using a title, when there's no author and you're using a title, and say this is the full title, you want to abbreviate that title to 3 or 4 words. So I would say the first 3, 13 coal miners. Now this is where it gets confusing in APA 6 or 7. While on the site, on the references page, the citations in the article title, there's no quotations. You are going to put quotations in the in-text citation. Also, he is correctly using sentence case here for the article title, which is how you do article titles, how you format article titles on the references page, but you use title case in the in-text citations. So we're going to say 13 coal miners, and that's a web source, so it might have a para dot something, like a paragraph number. So we're going to go back up here. So what did I say? 13 coal miners, 26. So it might have a paragraph number. Okay. Smog in LA has been a problem for years. So one thing I like right away that David's doing is up here, he lists things, right? Oil rig disasters, coal mine accidents, and visible smog. And then he goes on to give more information about each of those. First, he gives information on the Deepwater Horizon, then this Sago mine in West Virginia, or Sago mine, and then goes on to talk about the smog in LA. I would just join these sentences because this sentence by itself is a little bit vague. So, smog in LA has been a problem for years, if it's possible to be more specific about that. But I would just join this with a coordinating conjunction. And a result of many factors, most of which involve the burning of fossil fuels, especially by passenger cars and big trucks. He has a period here, doesn't need it. It goes after, like he's been doing after the in-text citation. I'm just going to go look at Margolis down here. It's not uncommon. Again, it's not uncommon for me to do that. Every time I see an in-text citation, I look to see what is the type of source. So this is a web source, so it might have a paragraph number. So I might say, hey, is there a paragraph number here? Because it's a web source. A few examples of the negative effects of fossil fuels on the environment. Until the need for alternative forms of energy is more widely recognized. Need a comma there because this whole part is what we call an introductory phrase. An introductory phrase comes before the grammatical subject, which is these types of incidents. These types of incidents will continue to occur. The growth of alternative fuels, specifically wind turbines, offer, because we have growth, nope, I'm wrong. Subject for agreement sometimes eludes me. Offers a possibility of offsetting the negative effects of fossil fuels. And here's where I would say because, and then give some of those reasons. What are the benefits of the wind energy? Other than that, I think the introduction is decent. The only thing I think it needs is a little bit, he's almost at a disconnected thesis. Because all of this, none of this talks about wind energy, right? Only that last sentence, the thesis does. So I would really, one of my notes would be you need to bring in some brief evidence to talk about, or before your thesis that talks about wind energy. And I would probably say that would go right before the thesis here. It seems like the most natural place based on the flow of this particular introduction. So I would say here is where you want to bring in some evidence on wind energy. All right, and some of that evidence, because the type of evidence that is, could be a variety of things. So I would say, I don't want to say how long it's been around, because if we think of like Holland and windmills, like they've been around for a long time. But maybe how long they've been in America. And some brief research that briefly addresses how they have benefited America. Right? So that would provide a little bit of information on the topic before the thesis. So this actually was a disconnected thesis, right? So all of that information before the thesis, none of it explicitly talked about wind energy. So but he's already set his introduction up in a way where it makes it really easy for him to just insert some information about wind energy prior to the thesis, so that by the time the reader gets to the thesis, they're like, yeah, okay, I know you're talking about wind energy. Great, let me read your thesis. And then just adding that specifically because that'll include some of that forecasting, right? The growth of alternative fuels. Maybe you want to be specific about clean energy, right? Because that's also kind of the difference here. Specifically, wind turbines offers a possibility of offsetting the negative effects of fossil fuels because, or I think what it calls for more than that is a such as. These are the few things that I'll discuss in my body paragraphs of how wind turbines offset the negative effects of fossil fuels. So that would be my notes for the introduction. Excuse me. Okay, so if we go into body paragraph 1, it's quite short. And it's doing something that I don't recommend doing, which is having a paragraph. This is actually considered not a best practice, but is where you have a paragraph and then a in-text citation is dropped in at the end of that paragraph. So the reader looks at that, even though it may or may not be the case, and it may or may not be the intention of the writer, but the reader looks at that as lazy writing. That's not just my opinion, that's just the general opinion of in-text citations that are dropped in at the end of paragraphs. Because it's like, okay, exactly which bits of the paragraph, if any, were taken from the Johnson source? Or was it just that last sentence? So that would be that's my initial reaction to this paragraph, not even having read it. So, okay, the benefits of wind energy have been well documented, but not everyone agrees that the industry should be encouraged and expanded. Benefits include, and this actually might be better off as part of the introduction. There is opposition to wind energy, correct? Because there's a list of the benefits: pollution reduction, low carbon emissions, renewability, and broad availability. There is opposition to wind energy, however, we want commas around that. That's called a buried however, because of its intermittency, storage limitations, cost of installation. That's a lot of opposition, as well as its no comma there, because as is what we call a subordinating conjunction, as well as its impact on birds, migratory habits, and visual and auditory pollution. Okay. So what I would recommend is right away I'm like, wow, wind energy's bad. There's a lot more negatives than positives. So I might say, let's just leave this. I mean, I'm just trying to think of which to do. I'm going to come back to this paragraph, actually. I'm going to move on. Okay. Wind turbines provide, because I don't just want to stand there or sit here and quietly look at it. So sometimes I need to move on and then that will help me better understand how to give feedback on that paragraph. Wind turbines provide massive amounts of power. For example, a single wind turbine can provide enough power for more than 3,000 households with very little pollution. Again, I might say I would go down to see the Arnold source. This looks like a web source. So I would say paragraph number. Maybe. With very little pollution. As wind energy becomes a higher percentage of our overall energy production, the use of fossil fuels, always a comma before such as coal and natural gas, will decrease, resulting in lower pollution levels. This is information that needs evidence. So I'm going to insert a comment here that says, in text citation needed. Unlike fossil fuels, wind is a renewable source. I would say that this, okay, because my initial, when I first read this first sentence, my first thought was, what is this paragraph about? And what is this paragraph arguing? Because again, we want to make sure that this isn't an expository paper, and when the, so here, the topic sentence is wind turbines provide massive amounts of power. So I would anticipate, because of that this entire paragraph is going to be about how it's a beneficial energy source, which he does provide information on that, right? A single turbine can provide this much power for these many households with very little pollution. I would say how little. I actually think that needs more information. As wind energy becomes a higher percentage of our overall energy production, the use of fossil fuels such as coal and natural gas will decrease. Right, and then I said in text citation, unlike fossil fuels, wind is a renewable resource. There are large parts of our country and the world that lend themselves to wind energy production. Sorry, people, only one space between sentences. Many times this does not interfere with operations like farming and ranching. Okay, now I don't know what this paragraph is about. So it talks about the fact that wind turbines, the topic sentence is addressing the fact that wind turbines provide massive amounts of power, meaning that it is an efficacious alternative energy source to dirty energy, right? Which would be the name for that. But then he brings in this idea of the renewability of the resource, and then goes on to talk about there are large parts of our country and the world that lend themselves to wind energy production. Okay, what's the purpose in telling the reader that? And this does not interfere with operations like farming and ranching. Okay, I didn't know it would. So this last part does not fit with the previous part. So if what I would recommend, and I'm just looking briefly, there's a lot of opposition addressed in here, so I'll get to that. In this first the second body paragraph, I don't know what to do with yet, right? Benefits include pollution reduction, low carbon emissions, which are kind of the same things, renewability, and broad availability. There's no discussion of it being a worthwhile energy source. Right, like I don't know, maybe there's energy sources that are not as good as, or aren't as reliable as other energy sources. I don't know that much about energy sources. So I would say there probably needs to be a paragraph on just this. So I'm going to say new comment. First body paragraph on the benefits of a clean energy source like wind energy. I feel like renewability can be a part of the clean energy conversation, right? That's kind of tucked away in there together. So, the discussion of renewability would, or I would say, could go with your body paragraph on the benefits of clean energy. So, because in terms of if we think about, well, what are the benefits of clean energy? Well, it's clean because it's renewable. That's one of the biggest factors. It has lower carbon emissions, pollution reduction, and the option, it has renewability, right? It's not something that can go away permanently like oil. So those all kind of go together. Broad availability, I feel like this subclaim is not getting, or I feel like it's getting the short shrift, although I haven't read the entire paper. What I feel like is missing is I think it's worth having a paragraph just on the efficaciousness or the, I mean, I don't know a synonym for efficacious, like the credibility or the fact that it provides good energy, right? That it's a reliable source of energy. So I would start out by talking about this concept of how clean energy reduces pollution, has low carbon emissions, and is a renewable energy source, right? Then go on to talk about how it's also an effective source of energy. But I'm gonna, I would say second body paragraph. If I can spell paragraph. I can't spell anymore. Discuss how wind energy is an effective energy source, right? So that's where information like this is how much power they offer. And probably in there also can be a conversation of availability, that it's not a limited source, right? Like say maybe, I don't know if water energy is limited to people who live within a certain proximity to water farms. I don't know what they call them, but people who use water as energy sources. Again, I'm thinking of mills that use water as sources. And then can probably also include a discussion with evidence on availability. But the key, when you talk about multiple things in one paragraph, is that you have to make sure that the topic sentence prepares the reader that there's going to be these two things are going in that paragraph, right? So ensure the topic sentence is something like, right, some additional, because I'm saying this will come after a body paragraph about the benefits of the clean energy, right? Renewability, pollution reduction, lower carbon emissions, that type of thing. So some additional benefits of wind energy include its effectiveness as a source of energy as well as its broad availability. I'm going to say around the globe, or just, that's wordy. I'll just say worldwide, right? One word instead of three. Right, so that would be like a topic sentence that prepares the reader that, okay, this paragraph is going to talk about these two things. That it's effective as a source of energy and it's also available worldwide. And then I would expect evidence, right, and in-text citations that address both of those things. Right, so first I have that topic sentence that includes the major arguments of the paragraph. Then first talk about the effectiveness, and then talk about the availability, bringing in evidence and research and in-text citations for both of the major subclaims in that paragraph. Okay. So then, as we know from this smaller paragraph that I wasn't sure what to do with, because what I feel like it should be done is I should feel like it should be integrated to some extent with the introduction. Like this part here where I'm saying such as, right? That's where this stuff would go. I don't think this sentence is needed. It's not doing anything. And then if you can address the opposition, it's helpful to address the opposition in the introduction. But I'm not sure it's necessary in this particular. It could be. I'm going to try to do it. So first I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to copy it in after this concept here, or this sentence idea here. These are only a few examples of the negative effects of fossil fuels on the environment until the need for alternative forms of energy is more widely recognized. These types of incidents will occur. Here's where we want to bring it. How long they've been around. I'm going to drop it in there. While there is opposition to wind energy because of its intermittency, I don't know what that means, so I'm going to get rid of it. Storage limitations, cost of installation, impact on birds and their migratory habits. And I'm just trying to make this list shorter. And visual and auditory pollution. Yes, visual and auditory pollution, that is a thing. And is a thing sometimes in certain places, more so in other places. So while there's opposition to wind energy because of certain things, the benefits of clean energy and alternative fuels greatly outweigh concerns about wind farms. That's a place where we might not want to repeat the word wind energy. Increasing access to, or increasing the number of wind farms in the U.S. and I'm trying to think of how to just reword this now to more fully address the opposition. Increasing the number of wind farms in the U.S., and this is the fun of writing people. Increasing the number of wind farms in the U.S., and I want to say the word ameliorating, but that's kind of writing in my voice. Ameliorating just means to make better. And I would say maybe mitigating any negative negative cultural perceptions of wind turbines. I don't think I need the word cultural. I just think negative perceptions of wind turbines offers I might put that in a different place. Can offset the negative effects of fossil fuels, such as pollution reduction, low carbon emissions, energy, or I would just say source renewability. And the other benefits we had in there were energy effectiveness and broad availability. To consumers. Sorry, let me just reread this. Increasing the number of wind farms in the U.S. of wind farms and wind, I'm just going to say wind farms to get rid of wind turbines, can offset the negative effects of fossil fuels, such as blah, 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 while also mitigating any negative perceptions, while helping, because I'm not saying it will, helping mitigate negative perceptions of wind turbines. Okay. I know it's a long introduction now, but it's doing all the rhetorical things. So it's not just, it doesn't have this good setup of examples. It also addresses, it also reconnects the thesis to the introduction. It also addresses the opposition and makes the thesis a little bit more specific. Especially since there seems to be a lot of discussion in this paper on opposition to wind farms. So it might be good to include that in the thesis. So, and that also helped me figure out what to do with this confusing smaller paragraph. And then what I did is I talked about how David can build out those first two body paragraphs, right? So you don't want to spend so much time on the opposition. I mean, it's not a bad way to do it. It's just, I think it's maybe about how it's rhetorically dove into, so to speak. I can't speak or write today. Okay. Is it still Sunday? It's not. Okay. Says I feel like it's the weekend and when I can't talk. So how to build out, so having that more comprehensive introduction that does the rhetorical work that it needs to do, building out those first two body paragraphs to really emphasize those benefits as discussed in the new thesis. And then moving on to, and let's see what happens here. Just to privately speak with David for a second, though not really. He talks about storage, energy storage, and one of your classmates is writing on, and I can't remember the name of the student. So if for the person writing on why electric vehicles are more environmentally damaging to the environment than we think, for the person writing that paper, if I throw out a name, it might be the wrong name, so I don't want to throw out a name. Some of the issues in that paper are sort of related here because I brought up wind farms in my feedback to this student because it indirectly is about correct disposal of EV batteries. And if you're talking about wind storage, one of the things that car companies are doing, particularly Nissan, is they're actually selling EV batteries to wind farms as a way to store energy. So car companies, particularly car companies that have EVs, obviously, are trying to address proper disposal of, because batteries, the EV batteries, long outlive the actual frame of the car. So it becomes an issue of, well, what do we do with these batteries? And as the student who writes about why these batteries are problematic for the environment, which they are, and then there's the aspect of lithium mining, right? There's all these, environmental issues. But e-waste and how to dispose properly of these hazardous products, one of the things that is done with them is they are being given to wind farms for energy storage. Tesla is also using batteries for what's called a power wall. And I believe Elon Musk is also involved in wind farms to some degree to help with energy storage. And it's actually quite impressive research. So if you have the time to bring that in as another benefit, that's actually a really new technology. Because the new technology of EV and batteries, and as they're developing them to be better and more long-lasting, the concepts or the issues of disposal and what to do with all of these batteries that are outliving the actual frames of the cars themselves, that's becoming a new issue, right? So companies like Tesla and Nissan and hopefully Mercedes and BMW will follow, as well as Jaguar. But Tesla's creating the power wall, which is effectively oftentimes made up of, they're like walls made up of EV batteries that soak in solar, or they store the energy from solar panels that's left over, right? So there's a technology to it that does have to do with storage that could be potential information and research you bring in as another benefit to wind farm. That's a really recent technology, and I anticipate that is going to grow immensely because it helps with the disposal of these environmentally problematic parts of vehicles. Okay. That was my little side note to David about integration of research, but maybe interesting information for everybody else. So let's move on. I'm just going to I know this is getting to be a long video, so I'm just going to kind of skim through and give my kind of initial reactions. So opposition to wind energy is not a new subject and focuses on several aspects of the industry. One of these has been the concern of intermittency. In other words, turbines. I know I got rid of this from your introduction. If you want to put it back, please feel free. I just got rid of it because I was like, I don't know what it means. Get rid of it. But I think that was more like me feeling like I was writing my own paper. But I'm not. So please feel free to re-include that if you want. In other words, the turbines can only generate energy when wind is above 13 knots. This means an alternate source must be used when wind, I don't think you always need an article though, is low unless some means of energy storage is available. Oh my God, that's what I was just talking about. Recognizing this problem, storage methods such as batteries, compressed air pump storage or hydrogen fuel cells are currently being developed. The need for, you've got two parentheses there, the need for storage capacity, but your period is there. Could be reduced by upgrading the power grid throughout the country. With a more efficient power grid, it would be easier to distribute power from the high wind to low wind areas. And this is how we would do this in fancy academic writing. So intermittency would be less of a problem. Love it. In terms of the topic sentence, opposition to wind energy is not... I would just say editing for concision. Focuses on several aspects of the industry, including the concept of, or I would say concern. I like your use of concern better. And I know I need a space here. The concern of intermittency. And I would join these. Which means that wind turbines can only generate energy wind to wind, and I can't spell intermittency. Okay. So this is a place, I'm going to leave a comment. I don't know where it went. Here it is. You're already starting to bring in that information about energy storage that I was talking about car companies selling or giving, I don't know what it is, EV batteries to wind farms. Also look at the Tesla power wall. It's one word. Okay. That could be potential energy that helps you to refute that opposition of intermittency. I would just say another common complaint regarding the use of wind turbines is that wind turbine blades kill large numbers of birds, often referring to them as bird choppers. That's terrible. Oh, so sad. Again, let me look at Chapman down here. That's going to be a web source. So paragraph number. And then period. As cited in the article, nope, too vague. I would just start with various studies were done in the US, Europe, and Australia, which found that, let's lowercase that W, that wind turbine blades do indeed kill birds and bats, but their contribution to total bird deaths is extremely low. In other words, for each bird killed by wind turbine, nuclear and fossil fuel powered plants killed. Okay, that's powerful research. And then here I would have your in-text citation, even if it's from that same source, that Chapman source. That was just to more effectively integrate that. And then again in Chapman's article, editing for concision. Look at what we can do. Also looks at some causes of human-related bird deaths in Canada. Stating that annually, this many birds were killed by human activity. And text citation needed here. Interestingly, both feral and domestic cats are responsible for that many bird deaths annually. Yeah. Okay, this should be like that. And again, David, you're probably going to have to go in and add some of those dot numbers, probably, yeah, for those citation. Early wind farms often ignore the relationship between wind turbines and bird deaths, causing opposition to wind energy. Eaton, another author. I'm going to go look at Eaton. This one has page numbers, right? So it is a P dot instead of a paradot. In his article, Killer Win. You don't have to mention the article titles. I would just say Eaton, 2005. Encourage more environmental planning to help reduce this danger, and then have the page number since that's a narrative integration. Oops, you already have that. I would just say here, arguably then, bird conservation is more bird conservation, arguably then, I would say wind energy is kinder to bird conservation than fossil. Am I not spelling fossil? Fossil fuel energy. Energy is energy. There are no risk-free options, but we can minimize the loss by conducting further research into the effects of wind turbines on the bird population. Good, I like it. Extra space here, don't need it. Some people oppose wind energy because of audible and visual pollution of traditional wind turbines. Actually, this is organized fine. I like it. Noise is not a major, because how this then ultimately works is you would really be emphasizing those benefits that we talked about earlier, but then you're kind of addressing these explicit oppositions, but then David is using good research to refute the opposition. So I would say keep that up. That's going well. So in this one, it's going to be talking about the audible and visual pollution. I think they're pretty. I like wind farms. They're very pretty. They seem very calm. But maybe, I don't know. I've never really heard them. Maybe they're very loud. Noise is not a major factor in some areas because of the remote locations. That's probably what I'm thinking of most wind farms. However, when wind farms intrude on populated areas, the constant low frequency noise can become an annoyance. And let's look at that Doolin source. That has page numbers, so I would expect a P dot something. And there's an extra parenthesis there. And then a period there. Recognizing this problem, manufacturers how do you spell that? That's not a word. That's not a word. Maybe Word can help me. I doubt it can. Okay. But it's not possessive. I'm just going to get that. There we go. It was the URER that was getting me. Are currently working to design blades that are quieter, and wind farms, we need a comma there, and wind farms are being positioned to avoid populated areas. That needs an in-text citation. So in-text citation. New turbine designs are being developed to blend into the landscape better and be less intrusive in populated areas. That needs an in-text citation. Some manufacturers have focused specifically on wind turbine design for urban areas. Let's join this. That needs in-text citation. This is what I was talking about when I was saying lots of people were missing in-text citations. Because you aren't always aware of all of the sentences that need in-text citations. An example of this is the tree vent, which is a tree-shaped structure it's hyphened, that has many small rotating turbines, you don't need that R, designed to look like leaves. Their quiet design takes care of the noise and makes them more acceptable in urban environments. And we just want to move. Yeah, so here we have that beautiful in-text citation with the quotation marks and the title case rather than the sentence case. But I am going to double check it on your... Yep, and that is a web source, so you might need a paragraph something. And then we get to the conclusion. Overall, the benefits of wind energy outweigh the negatives. Public acceptance is strong and growing, and technology develops, and wind energy becomes, we need a comma there, becomes a greater contributor to the power grid, and environmental benefits become more widely accepted. I'm not sure if I'm taking away the meaning. I think it should have this. Thus, environmental will become more widely accepted. Gray. Let's look at gray. And not D dot, but there are page numbers. At the same time, the negative aspects, maybe, will decrease due to technologies focus on energy storage improvements, bird protection, and decreased noise levels. So, can the increased use of wind energy help reduce the problems that come from heavy dependence on fossil fuels? In my opinion, the answer is yes. You want to put that in quotation marks. And then I would say if state legislators, because those are the decision makers, unfortunately, and the public continue to work together to increase. Oh yeah, I want to keep that as one. There we go. Okay. References. This goes like that. In 7th edition, it gets bolded, but not in the 6th edition. The other thing David wants to work on, he has them really nicely. I never had a problem finding a source, because that's what I do when I read through papers is I come across a source and I'll immediately go to the reference page to double check it. And if I can't find it, like I did with that one, with the exception of this one, right? They are, and because it starts with a number, you would put that first, David, just so you know. But it's organized, it's alphabetized. That's why I say, and if it starts with a number, that one would go first. It would start with 13 coal miners because it's a web source. So this is I would leave the editors out unless they're named. And then you have the site name here. So really all you would do is just delete this and then move that title to where you have history.com editors. Just replace that. Another thing you want to focus on is the hanging indentations. So again, how to manually do this is when your citation falls on more than one line, put your cursor on the second line of the first citation. Sorry, this technically isn't your first citation. Actually, I'm just going to do it because I have OCD. So I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to get rid of that because it's driving me crazy. We're going to move this. Okay. Oops, I put it above references. My bad. This one's going to be full of colors. Okay. Let me turn review up. Track changes off for a second so I can fix this properly. There we go. So, again, you want to put your cursor on the second line, and this little hourglass shaped thing, you take the bottom triangle and you move it to the 1/2 inch, and that moves everything. Everything but the first line to the 1/2 inch. Then all you have to do is put your cursor at the beginning of the next citation, push backspace or delete until you can it goes up or doesn't. This might be a formatting issue on his part. Normally it should do that. Or you can just do it manually for each one, because I don't think, oh, there we go. It'll let me do it on that one. Because what you should be able to do is just hit backspace or delete and then hit enter, and then it automatically formats it in that in-text, nice, or not in-text citation, nice hanging indentations, the beautiful hanging indentations, which makes it much easier for the reader to peruse through. Here, this one, tisk tisk, not in sentence case. Okay, just kind of looking at things. Word after a colon in sentence case, APA gets capitalized. Article, or sorry, volume number gets italicized. I don't know if it's sad or a good thing that I can point these things out too quickly. Italicized, volume number. I don't know what just happened. I clicked on a link. There we go. That happens when you're working with citations that have a lot of URLs. They used to never contain these. And I think that's all of the... This one, if this is the volume, it's not from a scholarly journal, but if that's the volume, then it should be like that. And this is because it's in parentheses, it's telling me that it's the issue number. So just double check that. Okay. That is... Okay, the one thing that's also missing, and I'm going to go to the OWL. I know this is a ridiculously long video. I've used up like all my battery. Go into the OWL Purdue. I think I'm in APA 7, but I will go to APA 6 since that's what David is using. Making me go back and forth between editions. Oh my goodness. So we're going to go to reference list, electronic sources, because I'm pretty sure you're missing the retrieved from. Yes, you are. Right? So before the URL, APA 7. In APA 7, they're asking you to put the date of access. So instead of retrieved from, it would say, for example, retrieved March 20th, 2020 from blah, blah, right? So that's the only difference between APA 6 and APA 7 for that. So you would want to put that retrieved from in your, or before your URLs for your citations, right? So for example here, retrieved from. I can't tell if I'm getting rid of the colon or not, or the comma. Ooh, I'd have to look at scholarly journals to remember how that's done. I'm just looking at web sources right now. And that is italicized, and it should not be. Yep. And same thing here. So you just want to go through and make sure that's all pretty. I'm not going to spend a million hours doing this because that is not very exciting stuff to do. I mean, I like doing it because it's nitpicky, but okay. So that is everything on revising. It's not everything, but it's a lot of information on the tedious work of revising the classical argument paper, or just a research paper in general. I will upload this to an announcement with the cumulative tips that I talked about earlier in the video. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, everybody.